not just because the folks who are in attendance today, they look powerful, don't they? But also because they represent some of the key organizations that are leading the industry of big data. On my left is an executive who is at the forefront of full integration of EHR, electronic health records, for one of the largest healthcare organizations in the world. As a CMIO of Kaiser Permanente, Dr. Mattison has led the organization into the future through early adoption of EHR. We dealt with reviewing its capability, selecting the right processes and providers, and he also monitors ongoing development of most current and effective uses of EHR in today's healthcare environment. To his left is another executive who is the CEO of Dataguise. Manmeet brings 20 years of technology leadership experience to Dataguise. Manmeet has held strategic level positions where he has been responsible for engineering, operations, and marketing. Manmeet has held senior executive positions in software and business development at Oracle, Zenith, Miri Technologies, and HCL. Next, we have Adam Dole, who is a Presidential Innovation Fellow working on the My Data initiative, also known as Blue Button. He's at the Department of Health and Human Services, and he has previously he previously was entrepreneur in residence for Mayo Clinic, where he was involved in strategic planning of new healthcare products and services. His responsibilities included developing new ventures at the intersection of healthcare and technology. He was also responsible for expanding Mayo Clinic's scope and research through new business models. Up next is Kirk Dunn. He's the Cloudera's Chief Operating Officer. He uses his diversified range of technology, engineering, marketing, sales, and management experience to oversee Cloudera's business operations. During his 20-year career, Kirk has worked extensively with established companies, high-growth organizations, and Fortune 200 accounts, successfully building strategic sales and product division and leading international expansions. So here we are with a great panel today. Now, as I mentioned in my opening remarks this morning, big data is going through an early adoption phase. And obviously there's a lot of buzz and hype going on and a lot of confusion surrounding the big data. So let me start by asking each panelist some of the urban legends that exist in the industry. But before I do that, let me share with you the story of this famous retail store in Utah. Anybody from Utah here? No? Good. So this store in Utah hired a brilliant data analyst who found that on Monday of every week, beer and guess what? Beer and baby diapers sales were strongly correlated. It turned out that a diaper emergency occurs fairly late in the evening, and the mothers who were caring for the baby, they would send their husbands to go and pick up the diapers. Obviously, the husband is annoyed. On his way back, he also picks up a 12-pack of beer to relax. They therefore concluded that a simple relocation of beer next to the baby diaper section can lead to more purchases, and the beer purchase can go up by 50%. Now, it's a great story, but it almost sounds like an urban legend. So I would like to ask each one of you to share with us and the audience some of the myths that surround big data. Dr. Mattison.
Well, the first thing I'd like to suggest to that company is that they add the vitamin to the diapers and the beer, because excessive drinking of alcohol causes vitamin deficiency. So,
okay, good idea. So I'll pass that along.
We can sweeten their convergence there. So I think one of the biggest legends about big data is that it's really just about the 3 V's: volume, velocity, and variety. And while those are all true, I don't think that is is fundamentally what distinguishes what big data really represents as an opportunity. I think I describe myself as a recovering physician and a recovering ontologist. And the reason I say I'm a recovering ontologist is that most database schemas in the conventional world are based upon canonically defined relationships between concepts. And those are constraints, and those constraints are created in the eyes of the beholder that has a set of use cases and a set of queries and maybe a set of regulatory requirements that define the relationships between the data types. What big data does, particularly in the Hadoop world, is that it allows you to store the data at an atomic level with all the associated metadata from whence that primary data came, and then you can operate on any data within that data structure, fully cognizant of the metadata, without being constrained by some preconceived relationship that is canonically instantiated in the database schema. What that allows you to do is to repurpose the same data over and over and over again in different queries. And so there's a concept of model on query as opposed to model on load. And so the notion that big data is just about more of the same old thing in the same environment where you can do different mashups, I think is fundamentally a misrepresentation and constraint about the real potential of using big data that is quite different than anything in enterprise data warehouse, conventional enterprise data warehouse, and allows you to do models and relationships between data that are specific to the queries that you intend to do with it without the constraint of preconceived relationships.
Manmeet?
Well, I think you went into it in detail. I'll stay a little higher. My thing is, what I've been seeing, the urban legend is cows will get more milk, there will be no drought, there will be no fraud, everything will be solved, big data will put in the place, and I'll have my life story done. That's next thing to sliced bread, but I don't think it's true. You need the right analytics, you need the right use, you need the right data. So all those things I think we're going to talk about in the panel, but yes, that is important, but big data is just going to solve a lot of things, but not all the things.
Yeah, I definitely echo what you just said there, and I would also add that I think we underestimate consumers' willingness to participate and be part of the solution. Oftentimes, I think organizations see their role as coming up with all the questions and all the answers and imparting this insight into their products and services that can then be delivered to customers. And I don't think that we have a good understanding of why people do the things they do. Analytics is really great at telling us what people are doing. And so I think until we can start really marrying what people are doing, why they're doing it, we're going to continually lead the consumer, or in my case out the patient, out of the solution, which is potentially the most valuable resource we have.
Yeah, so I think the two big misconceptions are big data means that it's big. I think in most cases, it doesn't really require a big data set or a lot of data. I think John talked about agility. And for the same reason why, if you think about, one of our founders talks about the smartphone and why we use the camera in the smartphone more than we use an SLR. And it's because in the phone, it can get access to Twitter and Facebook and email. So we can, as John mentioned, we can repurpose that same photo many, many different ways over a great period of time. So I think that's one big misconception, that it's big. I think one of the most powerful elements of this is agility, the flexibility of the data. There's a variety of other things that I think that are in play with respect to how we use data. I think the consumer part of it is the piece that will really be instructive as we go forward. So there's a lot to talk about today, but I think that's really pretty much it, is the agility piece.
John, you have more?
I wanted to make one quick comment on Manmeet's observation that big data will not solve world peace. And there's this assumption that if you capture all data, that you can just analyze it and not be too concerned about sampling bias because you've got all the data. There's an article in the Financial Times just last week on this sort of topic. And the classic example illustrating the fallacy of that urban legend is the Speed Up project. The Speed Up project is where you crowdsource the accelerometers of people's cell phones so they drive and find all the potholes in Boston. and because everybody has a cell phone, and because the accelerometers are always on, and the GPS is always on, and you know where the speed bump is. The truth of the matter is that in the disadvantaged communities in Boston, the speed bumps are very much underrepresented by that. So the assumption that having a complete set of data overcomes the need to understand statistical sampling is a problem. The other thing I wanted to mention is just a little bit tongue-in-cheek, as the urban legend that big data is not contributing to global warming. So if you think about all the spinning disks and all the energy that they consume, and there's been some actually analysis of how much of global carbon fuel consumption is caused by spinning disks in data centers. It is considerable. So one of the things we need to be really mindful of is what is the value of the data, and what is the data retention policy, and when do you compress it, and how do you compress it, and when do you discard it? And so we really have to have a better understanding of the value of data. And one of the misconceptions is that the value of the data is directly related to the known uses of that data from a business perspective. And I would argue that because of the agility brought about by the big data world, we really don't know. But the way we're going to find out is not by storing it in silos. So there's a place in Germany that's got 100,000 ECGs. There's a place in Sweden that has 1 million genomes. There's a place, pick a country, that has a huge data set of proteomes. If these are not connected to the same individual, the value of each data set is vastly inferior to what it is in aggregate. And so one of the things that we need to think about is how do we aggregate data to an individual or to some other organizing index so that we can begin to do those creative mashups and discoveries to find the metrics that have predictive value, that are meaningful, that bring value to the data, and hence a model of sustainability about what we compress and what we discard. Now, Manmeet is immediately going to talk to the privacy issue of that, because connecting all of my data to me is something that is a concern. But I will tell you that I eat my own dog food, and I am a member of Mike Snyder's IPOP study, where he does 6,000 assays of my blood and 4 microbiomes every 3 months and whenever I get sick for research purposes. So I do believe in the principle of value in aggregation.
Completely, what you said is so right. People have been collecting data since the 50s. Like we recently had a customer, they have been collecting data and it's been sitting in some place, archived and all that. And it's been sitting there for 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, till 90s. And now they go like, oh, Hadoop came into the picture. I can bring that dark data, what they're calling, back into life. If I bring it to life, I realize what are the patterns. It was sitting there, wealth of information was sitting in my office doing nothing. And now all of a sudden, and it was costing me money. It was not there cheap, because there were DBAs who were taking data out on a regular basis. I had like 10 people, I had security on it, I had kept it in some place. Now I can keep it alive, and I can figure out real values of it. I can find patterns and I can figure out what to use. But then, again, as you brought up, the question came in. Now if I point to some guy or some individual, how do I protect them? That's where the privacy issue came in, and the use of data was not happening because of that. But unknown was a bigger problem. They did not know what is in there, because people have changed. The new employees have come in, and that's where Hadoop came into picture, brought everything to life, and we came into picture where we protected it. Encryption and putting it down there did not solve the problem. Masking it or bringing it to life and using it brought it down.
I just wanted to add one more myth about big data, which is that the federal government can actually be a facilitator and platform for private sector innovation rather than. And I think that we're doing a lot inside the government right now to demonstrate some of the opportunities, whether it's releasing open data sets that can be used by the private sector, whether it's weather, GPS, climate, health data. One example is the FDA recently just created an API around their adverse drug event database, which is pretty groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And so I think one of the myths that government can't help and they only hinder is wrong, and I think we're trying to prove most of the country wrong in terms of government's role to really jumpstart a lot of innovation in this area.
Thank you. So my next question would be, although in spite of all the growth we're seeing in big data, it still remains in an early adopter phase. I'm reading that 2014 is a breakthrough year for big data, but I read the same thing for 2013 and for 2012. So what are some of the reasons, some of the limiting factors that are causing that slow growth? Perhaps Manmeet, you can shed some light on is it the privacy or?
As I said earlier, people said 2000, well, I've been saying it since 2008, since I founded the company, that privacy will become important and data will take off. You are talking only 11 and 12. Nobody. We used to go to the startup conferences 2 years back and people would say, oh, it's Wild West, I can do anything with the data. It was Wild West. People had access, and that's why Snowden's, I know government is not a hindrance, but still Snowden issue happened, target issues happened, and privacy was the one which was the hindrance. This year, when the data people have been playing around, evangelists and the young guys who have been playing around with the data and Hadoop in their environment and have been taking it in the non-production environment, they're saying, this is real. I can get value out of it. Showing it to their business leaders, saying that, hey, there is value in it, you should put Hadoop installation. So now they have to come out of that penalty phase and come there, and that's when the big guys, CISOs and CIOs and CSOs get involved and they say, guys, you cannot touch the data. Why you cannot touch the data? Because of the privacy issue. And that's where we came in and we are solving that. But I think this year should be the beginning of the adoption of big data in a big, large scale. You can see that Kirk is here. He just raised a big amount of money, which is, I think any public company has not raised that kind of money. So I think he can add to it. But I think this year and next year are going to be the growth for it.
You know, I think the big data market is like the 6'4", 12-year-old. When you see the kid, you think you have great expectations for this person. You realize they're still only 12. I think big data, in my more than 25-year career, I've never seen more companies, large and small, claim some kind of big data moniker in the history of technology. You can go back to client server, you can go back to IP networking, you can go back to, even network attached storage. One of the great stories of NetApp that Dan Warman tells is that NetApp was a $500 million public company before EMC realized that file-based storage was important. And I think we're seeing now is, I think the big data market is exploding, and there are almost no companies that I visit. I just came back from Southeast Asia and Australia. There is almost no company down there that does not have a production environment of big data. Now, again, like the 6'4", 12-year-old, well, why aren't you running your entire business on big data? And I think that is the aspiration, that is the desire. That in many cases, the Silicon Valley, it wasn't that long ago, we didn't understand why everybody didn't have a smartphone. And so we have to temper a little bit what actually is happening and what is incredible growth worldwide compared to the expectation of it. And I think we haven't certainly met the expectation worldwide, but there, no question, is an expanding, rapidly expanding market faster than I've ever seen. I just think expectation, reality hasn't caught up with expectation, but that does not mean it is not in full-scale production, because it's in all of our, we have over 300 customers, and we're growing at about, well, more than 50 a quarter. And these are not, average names. These are, global 1,000 organizations that are expanding very rapidly. So I think, again, it's an expectation, and I think our expectations are greater than any other industry I've ever seen in history.
So I think there's two additional things that really have significant impact on why it's taken so long for it to really take off. So the first was sort of popularized by Snowden and all the privacy issues. And I like to think of privacy as being the flip side of the coin of reciprocal transparency. And I think there, to some extent, and there's a report from the Institute of Medicine and another report from the Compute Trust, indicating that the general public is much more concerned about what you're doing with my data and who actually has our data. But there's this growing asymmetry where large corporations and nation states know more about us than we know about ourselves, and we know next to nothing about them or what they're doing with our data. So I think one of the things that I'm certainly advocating and working on is how to create more aggressive reciprocity and transparency so that we, as individual consumers, can know who has our data and what purposes this data are being used for. That's a long topic I don't want to dive into. The second issue is around the migration old school data scientists, and I am going to be pejorative called old school, because there's probably 2 generations of data scientists who've grown up on the primacy of the database scheme, and getting them to think in terms of putting data into the atomic level format is a really, really big challenge. And part of it is because they get paid to report to the state, local, and federal governments and for regulatory agencies across verticals in ways that are very specifically defined that are constrained and controlled by the database schemas and data models. It's very uncomfortable for them to think about the release from the constraints that feed the products that are required for them to get paid in terms of regulatory reporting requirements. And so we have a whole educational process ahead of us of taking old school data scientists and converting them to new school data scientists in the world of big data. It is a different way of thinking, it's a different way of analyzing, and it breaks down into 2 components. One is discovering new knowledge and what are the useful metrics, and the other is how do I apply those useful metrics in ways that actually generate more value than the regulatorily or oversight prescribed mechanisms of reporting based upon canonical database schemes. So getting that mind shift, and I can tell you, I've had this discussion with many of our own internal old school data scientists, and they're really freaked out. They're having a very hard time making this transition. So part of this is having formal programs in place to help people understand how, without throwing away the value of the old, introducing a complementary technology approach.
Absolutely right. Like, just go 3 years back, pretty much 90% of the data which existed was structured data. And now it's all unstructured data, and that's taking off and growing at a much faster pace than structured data. I ever agree with you. And data scientists don't even know how to handle and how to analyze that unstructured data, because there were certain reporting ways, there were certain analytical tools which existed in the past, and today all these big database companies will say, oh, suck the data out of Hadoop, put it into database, make it structured, and you have the best analyst tool in the world. No, that's not innovation. Innovation is new tools, new ways of doing things, analyzing Hadoop. And that's the reason these new Hadoop companies are taking off. And that's where I think the new innovation will come from. It won't come from old science, it will come from new ways of thinking, new models of thinking. Because, as you said, blood pressure and all that, they are hidden somewhere in that big medical report. Now you want to access the whole medical report. It's not structured, it does not have a metadata on it. It's a blood pressure, or it's a healthcare, it's a social security number, it's somewhere in there. You have to have new ways of doing things. Encryption is not solve all, there is new ways of solving the problem, and that's where I think Hadoop will come into picture, and you will see.
To piggyback on that, I think one of the big pain points that I feel the challenge is when we go out to the private sector to try and partner with healthcare institutions. We always talk about liberating this data and breaking down the data silos. The reality is when you start doing that, you realize that these data are in very proprietary formats, and there isn't a common standard oftentimes being adopted, because these hospitals, these healthcare institutions have spent the last 20, 50, 100 years in some cases creating proprietary ways of making sure that the data doesn't leave their system. And so figuring out the business levers to really partner with these institutions so that they understand the value of adopting non-proprietary standards and formats, so that not only can we start liberating the data sets, but so that those data can be made more actionable either by patients or consumers or by third-party companies that want to be able to make that data actionable for people. And I think that over-reliance on proprietary standards right now is actually killing us, literally. It's creating use cases and scenarios where records can't go from one system to another, even from Stanford to UCSF. And this is I would argue something that is putting not only quality of life at risk, but the health of our healthcare system around this assumption that there's standards out there we just need to get to.
If I could just add one case study in what David's just saying. There was an article published a couple years ago showing that over half the people in the country who had their spleen taken out were not appropriately vaccinated. for specific types of bacteria, which the spleen is necessary to prevent leading to very, very rapid death. And so, upon reading that article, I sent it to two teams. One was a natural language processing team, one of our ontologists, and all of us sitting in the back room here, and the other was our structured data team with Ben Broder sitting right over here. I asked the two teams to look at 12 million records and find all of the patients who had had their spleen taken out, but who had not been appropriately vaccinated. And what was really fascinating is, first of all, most people who have had their spleen taken out it's because of a traumatic accident, motor vehicle accident, whatever. The surgery is done in St. elsewhere. It never makes it back to their home medical record in any structured format, and it's more often than not represented in unstructured information. And so using natural language processing to identify those patients became critical. So in 3 hours, the natural language processing team had a list of among our 12 million members in the database who had had a spleen out and who was most likely not to be up to date with the vaccinations. It took much longer with structured data, not because the structured data is inherently worse, but because in this particular use case, it is not routinely captured in that way because of the Singh elsewhere phenomenon. So I think, and there are many, many other examples of how you need to use a very, very complementary approach of both structured and unstructured data and ontologies and non-ontologically organized information in order to get that truth.
Actually, if you move unstructured data to structured data to big data, then automatically it becomes unstructured because there is no relationship. When you marry that with unstructured, you need new ways of doing it. This old model is not going to work. And we are seeing innovation. I think every week we are seeing one or two analytical companies popping up saying that my analytics is better than this. I have predictive analytics, I have prescriptive analytics, I have something else kind of analytics, and mine is for healthcare, mine is for financial. You see that, and that's where the innovation will come out. And probably 20 will burn, but one will survive. But I don't want to burn.
So my next question is, as Manmeet mentioned, that there's a need for innovation in big data. What are some of the new architectures and topologies that are needed to manage this huge avalanche of big data that we'll be facing? Perhaps Kirk, you can shed some light on.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. We went from kind of centralized architectures to decentralized architectures, and we're actually bringing them back to a centralized form. And the reason is we're talking a lot about. John talked about data silos and data being spread out. Matter of fact, the banking industry is the most kind of obvious one, where you have your checking account data, your credit card, and your retail brokerage, and your mortgage, and they're all separate. You may have one, or you may have all four, and fundamentally that banking institution sees you as 4 different people, maybe 5 different people. No way of really realizing how to cross-pollinate and understand you better, understand your trends, what you do. So what that means is, if we're going to have one view of the person, we need to have kind of one corpus of data. And in a sense, that brings it all back to bringing all the data into one location, or in one virtual location, if you will. And so the issue is, instead of, and we realize with the growth of data, in particular unstructured, the difficulty is moving data. You can move compute, you can move applications, that's easy. It's hard to move data. And so if you have a terabyte or 100 terabytes or a petabyte of data, wherever that resides is where it will stay. And so the architectures that are being developed now, and this we saw in this area with Google being the company that kind of innovated all of this, fundamentally around GFS, the Google File System, basically puts everything in a single instance, if you will, so that all the queries, all the compute, all the applications can go to it, much like your photos on your smartphone. They're all there, so you have access to them. You can do whatever you want with them whenever. So the architecture of the future, in fact, one of the big challenges in the data center, one of the big bottlenecks is the network. So if you're moving data around, trying to get it to be processed with other data, either data that is logically connected or not, the movement of data, and therefore the locality of data, becomes a big deal. So data locality is key, and then bringing compute and apps to it, I think, is the way to the future. And we're seeing this in certainly companies here that start up, and in large innovative enterprises around the world as well are doing this.
Yeah, absolutely right, Kirk. We are seeing it in our customer. We are seeing it like everybody wants one source of growth. They don't want 5 sources of growth. Like from a bank, if somebody has taken a mortgage, he's also doing a banking with them, he's also doing something else with them. They want one place. They want to treat that customer better, not like one person who's doing one thing, and that is going to be the new architecture, and that is the way going to be. I know master data management tried to solve that problem, but then it became 5 master data. Then there became 7 master data. I hope this time it doesn't go haywire, and everybody brings everything in one hub, and it will really give a new life to the data, and good life for us.
So I like to think of the question of managing the avalanche data from the patient-generated health information perspective. And we just published a report, some great work the federal government is doing on patient-generated health information, technical expert panel. And I think there's really 4 taxonomies that are very, very relevant. So the first taxonomy is what are the archetypes of data? It's basically time series data, text, and images. So those sort of account for most universal data. The second is, how do you know when to escalate from a machine captured data to a human and say, hey, you need to take a look at this? Because with all the wearable sensors and all the pervasive sensors for the exposed zone and the analytics of social and social exhaust, with all those data streams, what's relevant to a clinical decision? How do you know what belongs to a medical record and what just belongs to an analytic database? How do you know when to escalate? So the second taxonomy has really 3 components. Absolute value outliers, so if a blood pressure is too low or too high, or temperature is too low or too high, that's an absolute outlier. Second is trending. Is this trend out of bounds? So someone whose blood pressure is normally 110/70, and all of a sudden it's 135/90. That's a big deal. That's a trend out of bounds for them. But for someone else who's being managed and is normally 130/90, 135/90 is nothing. That's noise. And then the final is aggregate. When you look at multiple data types for individual from multiple sources and say, ooh, this particular aggregation tells me that actually they were over-dialyzed and dehydrated, you need about 5 or 6 different parameters to show that. Not a single one of those parameters would be an outlier and an absolute value, but in aggregate they are. The third taxonomy is being able to personalize that. So I use my wife as an example and my daughter, because their normal basal blood body temperature is 96.8 to 97 degrees. So when they say they have a fever and they go to the doctor and say, oh, you're 98.4, you don't have a fever, that's wrong. For them, that is very much of a fever. And so we need to have both diurnal patterns as well as personal nomograms, so that for each of the prior taxonomy of the absolute value, the trend, and the aggregate, we know what's out of bounds for that individual. And the fourth taxonomy is a topology, and where we localize the analysis, the storage, the compression, and the discarding of data. So if we just simply stuff everything into a centralized cloud, or even a federated cloud, we're missing a big opportunity, and we will contribute to global warming through all the standard disks. What we need to do is we need to be very thoughtful about the topology of the entire stack, from the edge and the sensing device where the data is originally recorded, to the local network that may be either person-centric or location-centric for the aggregate of the data, to middleware hops along the way, to an internal cloud, to either a big cloud in the sky or a federated cloud in the sky, and say, what are the kinds of information that we can analyze and manage locally and compress it and discard it? And I'll use blood pressures or in a brittle versus a stable diabetic, blood sugar in a brittle versus stable diabetic, or blood pressure, someone with labile hypertension or stable hypertension. There's a whole lot of data coming out of all 4 of those patient types. But in the brittle diabetic, you want the sampling to be frequent and sent to a higher place in the topology so that it can be escalated to a human. The same is true for a labile hypertensive. But for people who have got stabilized diabetes or stabilized blood pressure, you want out on the edge of the sensor to be saying same old, compress, discard. You don't want to be streaming all that data. It's not a bandwidth issue, it's a capacity, and it's a signal and noise issue. So those are the 4 topologies that I think of in terms of how are we going to intelligently manage the localization of where we put analytics, storage, compression, and discarding, how we think about escalating from machine to human, both on a generic level and at a personal level, and then what are the archetypes of data that apply to all of those. And I think that there's a way to do that. I think the industry's going to evolve to that, but it's going to take some time to really get standards around how that's done so that we can have networks of sensors on the edge that conform to a rational way of doing local management when appropriate and just streaming the rest as appropriate as well.
You just added 1 year in a doctor's life in this business. He has to learn so much stuff. He probably become a data scientist and a doctor.
So I actually am working with the University of Toronto and some other places about the future of medical education. My son just finished his medical education at one of the greatest medical schools in the country. And I was shocked to see that he got the exact same education I did. I just kept waiting for him to come home and say, "Dad, guess what I learned today?" I said, "Oh, that's cool. I know about that." But in fact, what he did is he recorded that he got exactly the same education that was given 150 years ago when I went to medical school in residency. And the truth of the matter is, data science and genomics and all of the panorama and exposome is not only going to rewrite medical education, it's going to rewrite medical science. And the textbook of medicine 10 years from now is going to look nothing like the organ system approach today.
100% agree, because the doctors of tomorrow are individual. We will be as good as a primary physician of yesterday. I think we will have more data at our hand than a primary physician would have. I don't think we'll ever need to go to them. But this thing, that's what this is, the big revolution will happen. We'll probably only go, hey, I think I need a surgery and I have a liver problem or something like that.
And to your point, Vinod Khosla famously says that 80% of doctors are going to go away. I think 80% of their current work will go away. I think that there's a whole new opportunity for how trained healthcare professionals can find higher value tasks than what they currently do. And most specifically, I think it boils down to being able to use visualization tools to represent different options for an individual based upon the intersection of the big data knowledge set with the little data about everything we know about that individual, and then transforming that into a value set. And the example I like to use is, so a 40-year-old woman comes in with hypertension and diabetes new onset. There are 3 options for how to treat her. One gives the best possible outcome, one is the lowest possible risk, and third is the lowest possible effort on her part. And she says, well, my daughter's getting married in 3 months, so really, I want the lowest risk, lowest effort part, because I am just maxed out right now and I can't afford any risk. But as soon as my daughter's married, I want the highest opportunity one. So we need to be able to use visualization tools to condense all of these massive amounts of data into value sets, and then the role of a true physician is more and more going to become understanding the value set of that individual, matching that against the value representation of the mashup of medical knowledge with what we know about that individual, and supporting 3 conversations. One between the care team and the patient, one between the personal care team and the patient, and the third between the patient and the persona and the whole person, where they live, work, play, learn, and the patient, because there are different roles. And so visualization tools are going to become absolutely critical, and we need to be able to drill down from those visualizations to both the specific data about the individual as well as the knowledge base of medical science, to the extent that that individual is interested and capable of understanding these drills.
See what you guys are doing to the world there? You're just changing the way people study, think, read, or learn more things. Go to medical. I think the innovation will come not from healthcare, but it will also come from the finance side. If you look at it today, how many times do you even go to a bank? How many times do you go to a banker to say, I want to buy this stock or sell this stock? Pretty much 90% do it on their own. They have gone away, half of them. So the same thing is going to happen, and I think innovation is coming on all sides. And it's not just going to come today. I think with big data, they can figure out how much milk cow is giving, which cow is giving an organic milk or not, where he ate, where she ate, or what she's doing. Like, so much is changing with this big data. But with the personal information comes the privacy, and that was a big problem for adoption in like 2010, 11, 12. And I see that changing in 2014. That penalty box, which they say, we want to get out of it and get into production.
And then imagine the day when you buy brain surgery online.
I want backup.
And John, I'm really glad you brought up the topic of patient-generated data, because I think, no disrespect to any physicians in the room, but I think we have an over-reliance on the information that's collected inside the doctor's office. And we all know that we don't spend very much time. We have 15 minutes with a physician when we go in for a visit. Just imagine the possibility of being able to have the right analytics to be able to make sense of all the information that we're collecting about ourselves that could potentially impact those discussions in those 15 minutes. And I think that there's a culture of medicine in the United States that evangelizes this paternalistic nature that doctor knows best. And I think we're running up against the limitations of that. And if we don't figure out a way to make more sense out of the information that we're already collecting about ourselves that could be used in the context of those conversations to represent how we spend 99% of our lives, I think we're running blind and we're seeing the consequences of that.
I mean, think about it. This is a really, really basic and more crude example of that. But think about how you buy a car today. You walk into a car dealer and you say, "This is what I want. This is what I'll pay. Take it or leave it." And I think so. You're exactly right. I think, and this is the example you use about the consumer dictating the relationship. And I think that's maybe there's a phase shift here going on in medicine and other areas as well. So it's a very good example.
Well, and coming back to what Manmeet was saying about how we're going to learn from the financial industry, there was a Nobel Prize in economics awarded about 8 or 9 years ago to someone in Berkeley who studied what's called asymmetric negotiation. He looked at used cars. And what he found is systematically, well, there's a market where the seller knows a whole lot more about the car than the buyer. The seller's not being transparent about problems known to that car. The entire market discounts the product. So used cars are generally higher value, on average, than new cars because of that systematic discounting, because of the asymmetric negotiation. When you start thinking about what's going to be happening with consumer accessible, consumer ingestible, online diagnostics and analytics, the asymmetry of knowledge between the typical person and the healthcare delivery system is going to be very much narrower. And so that has significant economic implications for healthcare delivery. And I think a lot of the open data efforts of the federal government are very much targeted at closing that gap. And I'm a big advocate of that. One of the biggest fear factors around all this is physicians are understandably terrified of being held accountable to defend in a court 3 years later everything that was in a chart at a moment in time. When you start talking about streaming data coming in the chart, their view is, if I don't have time to review it, I don't want it on the chart. And that's where this backstopping, machine-to-human escalators and triggers when something is out of bounds for that individual patient, two of the taxonomies I referred to earlier become critical, so that physicians can have some comfort that they have a safety net built into their advanced decision support. That streaming data that may be relevant in the future, but maybe not today, is available. But as soon as it is relevant, there is an escalation from machine to human that has got their back.
I'll take it away from healthcare a little bit. It's the consumer who's driving it. It's the consumer who's saying, like 10 years back, if your credit card was stolen, they'll send you a new credit card. It won't be an issue. You have no place to go say bad things about anybody today. If a credit card is stolen, it's not that $0 cost. You say, my information is my information. It costs money. It is value on it. How come it's stolen? Why didn't you protect it? They go on Twitter, they go on Facebook, they go on LinkedIn, they say badmouth the company. Target got such a bad mouth on this one. 10 years back, think about any retailer if the data was stolen. Do you even remember it? I don't think Target you're going to forget for the next 10 years. So it's the consumer, it's we and you who are changing the world here.
And I think there's a lot of emphasis on the federal open data initiatives. I'm sure we've all heard about a lot of things in the news related to that. What we don't hear as much is a parallel effort called the My Data Initiative, which really is all about everybody in our country having access to their health records, their energy consumption data, and their financial aid records when they're available for financial aid status. And that is the first foray into this My Data movement. And I don't think that we do a good enough job from the federal side telling that story, because when it's really about you, when consumers realize that they don't have access to their own data, I think that this will create more demand. Once people understand the limitations, they don't actually have access. And I think there's a misconception. A lot of people think we need to allow the consumer to own their own data. When you actually talk to them, it's less that they care about owning it, and it's more that they care about being able to access it at the right time and making sure that they can share it across the system, which requires machine-readable formats and that sort of thing, which most organizations don't make available to the end user. So I think there's a good job by the government telling the open data story, and I think we need to amplify the My Data story as well.
And I want to give a lot of credit to Adam for all the work that he's done and his team towards that end. And I just want to reflect on a conversation we had with HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius a couple of years ago about consumer-driven healthcare reform. So at Kaiser Permanente today, the instant your lab result is resulted to the doctor, it goes into the chart, and the inbound to the doctor, it goes to the patient at exactly the same time. Yesterday, we launched in Southern California, in our Southern California region, the exact same process for progress notes. So we're just starting with a few doctors and a few patients, but the intent is to make this widely available so that as you're walking to your car, if you haven't already seen the progress note on your screen because the doctor hasn't signed it yet and it hasn't reported the chart, as soon as it files to the chart, it will file to your chart so that you have full transparency, not into just your lab results and your preventive measures that are due and your medications and your refills and yada yada, but actually to progress notes as well. And so this project is called Open Notes. And for those of you musicians, you recognize the analog in music, an open note. And the reason it was named that was because Tom Del Banco, the faculty internist at Harvard, who pioneered this approach, is himself a musician. And there's something very mystical and musical about what Adam was just describing, about having that level of transparency. And we are working very aggressively towards that end as well. But Adam is really driving a lot of this through federal policy. Kudos to you for that.
Well, thanks. And I think that the rule makers and legislators also have to take a lot of responsibility in taking the advancements in technology into consideration, so that the rules that they put in place don't reflect 40 years ago what was capable. Now that we actually have, it is feasible to imagine delivering the right information to the right people at the right time, whether it's through the consumer or from provider to provider. I think that the policies need to take that into consideration and address that appropriately.
Thank you. So my next question, and this will be the last question, and then I'll let the audience ask questions from the panelists. So recently we've been hearing a lot about a new role in the organization of Chief Data Officer. Perhaps a new role, or perhaps a CIO role should be replaced by a Chief Data Officer. What do you guys think of a need for this new role in the organization?
Yeah, I don't think it's a replacement for the CIO. The CIO is the information or information systems officer. Chief Data Officer is something more along the lines of what John described, actually of himself, as where the application meets the compute. It's where the practice meets the business, if you will. And I think never before, typically what happens is a business owner thinks up of an idea. They want to go analyze a certain market. They want to understand something about a group of patients, et cetera. And then they go to the IT organization. They say, here's what I'm looking for. Can you systematize this? Can you give this to me in a repeatable model that I can review once a week, once a month? And that thus has kind of spawned the modern day information technology organization. Today, those providers, those practitioners like John, are technologists themselves and are very, very close to the intersection between the application and actually the compute side of it. Ironically, very similar to the way I described the new architecture, which is where you're bringing the compute and the application to the information, to the data. So the Chief Data Officer is in fact that kind of large-scale bridge in any organization, government agency, healthcare provider, commercial enterprise, that has both one foot in the business and also 1 foot in how you actually instrument the business, if you will. So I would call IT instrumenting the business, not just technology for the sake of technology. So I think it's a new role that has evolved out of kind of this next wave of professional becoming versed both in technology as well as the practice of their business.
From my side of the world, the CDO role is more reporting into operations, not into the CIO. Because somebody has to take ownership of the combined data. Somebody has to say, analyze it this way, define policies, how to protect the data. Who should be responsible? Like, I don't think the firing of a CIO at a target was the right thing, because that CIO probably didn't even know what was stolen, didn't even know who owned the data. This should be a CDO created. That role should be operating into operation, not into technology, should be a business role, but should define policies and IT should execute on it, and should be a more senior role, because tomorrow the whole security system is changing also from my world. It used to be perimeter security, put the best firewall, hackers will not come in. But the hacker inside, the guy who you are trusting your data to inside, he's going to walk away with that huge amount of data. And who's going to be responsible for that? So that inside that flowed in. Like NSA case again, it comes in. Who was responsible for that? You cannot make a CIO responsible for that. There has to be a data officer. And that CDO role is a very new and a creative role. I think it's great. It should exist and it should report into operations.
I'll just give a little anecdotal story. So one of our senior executives is fond of saying that we're basically an information technology organization with a care delivery arm. And as you might predict, I take a great deal of umbrage at that description. And I hope all of you who are Kaiser Permanente patients also take the same umbrage that I do with that assertion. I think that the role of the CIO, the CTO, the Chief Data Officer, the Chief Information Security Officer, the lines are getting so blurred. And if you haven't read the book, The Second Machine Age, I highly recommend it for a number of reasons. It just published recently. But it talks about the increasing role of AI, machine learning, and robotics disintermediating lots and lots of jobs worldwide. It's already underway, significant concern. But more importantly, to this topic, and apropos to the Chief Data Officer, is that if you think of the old Lego building blocks that just snap together versus the new Lego, those of you that have young kids or have seen the new Lego, the modules themselves, think of Lego as an open modular architecture. The individual modules are getting much more sophisticated every single day. And as we move more into open source software and in open modular architectures, the ability to be creative and innovative is growing not only exponentially within modules, but meta-exponentially across modules. And as we begin to realize the capabilities of these ever-expanding, highly functional, interoperable modules, the role, these siloed roles of the CMIO, the CIO, the CTO, the CISO, the CTO, the Chief Data Officer, all of these things are going to be blurred, and what I see is much more of a collaborative team approach to how this is done. Now, large corporate entities love to pigeonhole people into roles of accountability. So we still need to have clearly who's accountable for what, so that we make sure that everybody has their eyes on a set of things, and for everything there's a set of eyes on it. But to the extent that the big data world and the open modular architectures of the open source world in particular are transforming the capability and capacity, the combinatorial permutations of these ever more functional modules, there needs to be a much more collaborative construct about how we think about the parsing out of these roles.
And I'll just add one small thing. I think there's something really interesting that's happening in the government right now, and I think it's akin to Joy's Law. So Bill Joy, co-founder of Sun Microsystems, famously said, most of this, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for somebody else. And when you think about that, it applies to every organization that's represented in this room, specifically with the federal government, because it's so hard to hire amazing talent. But I think the types of roles that we're talking about here, whether it's Chief Data Officer, CTO, how do we position some of the efforts inside the government or in the organization to build platforms that allow contributions from the outside, whether that's all about opening up data sets, designing RESTful approaches to delivering the data, however we can do that to help facilitate this idea that we don't have all the answers no matter who you are. You've got to figure out a way to collaborate and not just break down the silos, but think more collaboratively from the start.
Okay, we can now take questions from the audience. If you can come up to the microphone here and introduce yourself.
Hi, John, Ravi, and Adam, and Kirk. Great talks. My name is Shadab, Kaiser Permanente. Question I have is that topic was next wave of innovation, and a lot of the organizations, are on a Gartner hype cycle, still at the point where we are at the state of illusionment about big data. And most of the state of illusionment is because of the cultural incompatibility or the cultural challenges that big data bring into you. What thoughts do you have to kind of overcome those cultural barriers that an organization has to kind of embrace the idea of big data?
I'll just say very briefly that information travels at the speed of trust. Actionable information travels at the speed of trust, and building trusting relationships and collaboration is going to be the most important thing, because the greatest discoveries and innovation are occurring at the boundaries between disciplines. And so to the extent that you build trust between the different disciplines, you really, I think, very directly and deliberately accelerate the pace of innovation and actionable information.
Yeah, I think it's called the trough of disillusionment, and it's usually when, in some cases, when reality is yet to catch up with expectation. And as I mentioned before, I think expectation is so large in this area for all these interesting medical, commercial, consumer reasons we've talked about. I mean, big data touches us all the time, and we have this great expectation that I think we're in it. So I think one of the key things in getting through it, which is the nature of your question, I think trust is a very big deal. I also believe that adoption cycles just take time. As humans, we're slow to give up the old tools and accept the new ones. And I think we're seeing that just occur at a very rapid rate. I think companies like Dataguise, like Cloudera, and others will be the ones that will hopefully continue to be at the forefront to make consuming data not as big of an issue, so that you can get the insight. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, keeping all this information, storing it, it's the old so what? Why do we have this data in the first place? Why does sensor data matter? And it's because at some point, at the end of the day, we can get a piece of insight that we didn't have before. And so that's all about creating tools and capabilities to gain that insight that isn't there today. And I think as we watch this market move over the next few years, we'll see the ease of getting to that insight increase. Definitely.
Just a small line there. Like as you said, trust is important, and the second thing is DBAs own the kingdom till late. Today all DBAs want to be Hadoop administration, but that's not going to happen. Their mentality has to change. I think the new people, the new generation of people have to come in and take that role. If life is given to us, I'd rather fire all DBAs and new people there so that unstructured data become more successful. But that's not going to happen. It's going to be a slow process. It will take time.
One last reference. If you haven't read Thomas Datumfora's work on information government, he's written many books, many articles. Governance over who has access to what is going to become increasingly critical, and he's been writing about it for 20 years brilliantly.
Thanks, Gus.
Thanks to our panel. It is really great speech. My name is Kirk from Inspire Technology. We provide home care IT service. My question is, what's the home care role as a data source in current healthcare, and what's our expectation for home care to be an important data source to support our healthcare in the future? Thanks.
I'll take a first crack at it. I'm sure John's got some thoughts as well, but I think it's absolutely critical. we don't have the resources today to keep filling more beds in hospitals, nor is that fair to patients and families. People want to be able to live a high quality of life, and we have the available technology today to make this happen remotely. And I think part of it's legislature. Some of the rules around state lines and delivering care and so forth haven't been worked out yet fully to make that scale. But I think if we don't figure out a way to keep people in their homes and leverage community-based programs and lower licensed individuals like coaches and folks that can go visit you in your home. These are the kind of things that I think will help us do more with less. And I only see us leveraging our available technology to make that happen more.
Yeah, great comment. Just two quick things. One is that we launched a project that I call Video Dial Tone, where instead of thinking about telepsychiatry or teledermatology or telewound care or this or that, we basically have pervasive ability to provide a video consultation when appropriate, which is it's just another communication modality, and that's going to be a big help. The second thing is that for people who are recently discharged from the hospital who may have complex disease and need to make sure that they're not declining, the number of sensors that are coming out of the wearable sensor market, and I'm an advisor to the Qualcomm X Prize for the tricorder. The emerging technologies in that space, we're down to 30 finalists, we'll be down to 10 in September, and we'll get the award a year from now. The number of real amazing emerging technologies that have not even shown up in the market yet, to really be able to understand what's going on non-invasively at home is growing. So the ability to manage those data and manage individuals and keep them out of trouble and out of hospitals, and it's a much safer place to be at home unless you absolutely have to be in the hospital for a procedure, is remarkable. But the other thing is we need to be sure that people who are generally healthy don't convert all of these wearable sensors into digital nannies, and that we use them instead of being constant nags to walk more, eat better, lead healthier lives. We need to use them to initiate, motivate, and calibrate us towards mindfulness, because we pretty much know what allows people to live long, healthy lives in the studies of blue zones. And we can use the wearable sensors to help us get to that state of mindfulness, but we're at risk of becoming what someone is named a new ICD code, not yet codified, but chronic wellness syndrome. So we need to avoid converting all this sensor information into a bunch of chronic wellness syndrome diagnoses.
And I think the limitation is not a technology one right now. It's the adoption of those technologies that we have. And I think we're going to see a huge uptick in adoption once we have true payment reform that actually incentivizes people to keep their patients well and out of hospital. But for right now, a lot of business models disincentivized.
Kind of like a prepaid comprehensive care model. Why didn't we think of that?
Okay, next question.
My name is Kirk. I have a decade of experience in healthcare and pharma, and I want to thank the panel. Excellent overview of big data. This question is for Adam. 8 years ago, I worked in an open source project sponsored by NIH called CMIO. You might have heard of it. It's, as far as I remember, it was a $15 billion project sponsored by NIH, and it was focused on cancer trials data across the country. Duke, Mayo Clinic were part of it. I was a part of the small team to develop an open source project. It's been 8 years. I'm not a part of that project anymore, but I keep looking back at what's the progress. And I believe that program has been retired, and the code is available, but they're still in SQL and some of the older technologies. Question for Adam. That is, I think cancer research is still in its infant stages when it comes to federating the data across hospitals, especially comprehensive research centers. What do you think is the role of education, migration, and transformation of cancer research and big data?
So I think that's a great example of a lot of work that went in that hasn't necessarily had seen as much day of light as it should. And part of that, I think, is a lack of awareness internally within the agencies and process to get those results out, or create systems that can actually deliver the data to third-party organizations that can make that really actionable. So there's a few things that are happening right now to make sure that agencies have a recognition that they should be identifying these high-value target projects and creating services that get the data out. So having CTOs and CIOs that are thinking more strategically. I think a lot of the work that Kirk is doing at the White House, he's the United States Chief Technology Officer, is basically putting a lot of Trojan horses inside of these agencies to make sure that projects like that have the full value that they can. And I don't know the project specifically, so I can't speak to that. Maybe John knows a little bit about that one. But I think that we're doing a lot of individual projects to try and change the way government works and how government thinks about their role, so that it's not just about doing the work internally, but getting that work out. And we're using GitHub now in the HHS. We just launched a couple of APIs for the first time ever. These are new things, and I think we're crawling before we can walk. But I hope that project gets the recognition through some of these efforts.
And so again, kudos to Adam and Todd Parker and the crew. They're doing amazing work in this open data initiative. Just a couple of quick facts. There are more viable genomes than there are people who have ever walked on planet Earth. And so a national approach to this is insufficient. The second thing is cancer is fundamentally a genomics disease. There are consortiums all over the world that have huge data sets around the association of which SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, are associated with which cancers. There's a lot of information about this. Believe it or not, in the year 2014, there is not a single semantic representation that can say, does anybody in any consortium outside of mine have a patient with this array of SNPs and this clinical condition? That syntax does not exist. So David Altshuler at Harvard, the Broad Institute, has initiated an international initiative called the Global Initiative for Genomics and Health, with two initial focuses. One is rare diseases, and one is oncology. And he asked me to be on the advisory board because I'm still a recovering oncologist and not really do recover. And so I've been helping them through how do we keep it really, really simple. And we got an agreement from all the genomics consortiums from around the world who attended this 3-day conference I went just a couple of weeks ago, that within 6 months, we're going to have 3 members of the consortium able to ask that simple question. Do you have a patient with this genetic array, with this clinical expression of that cancer or this rare disease? So it's mind-blowing to think that semantic potential and that capability is only going to exist 6 months from now. It doesn't exist today. But David Altshuler is really leading that initiative brilliantly, and we're going to get there.
And let's exchange information afterwards, because I'd like to find out what's going on with that. I'll follow up with you.
Hi, my name is Kiran, and I've spent the last 15 years in healthcare technology, mostly in the device side. So, John, you talked about breaking down the silos in healthcare to get the value out of the data. Yet, if I look at the data in ICUs or ORs or what have you, device manufacturers, EHR manufacturers are actually incented just the opposite way, to keep it all proprietary. I don't know if you touched on this. So I'm wondering, what do you guys see driving the breaking of those silos? Is it going to take maybe from those 3 coming 4 years from now to do that, or is it all regulation or something that's driving it?
So one of the problems, you're absolutely correct. The EHR vendors historically and the device manufacturers historically have had a business incentive to have proprietary semantic representations. And I've advocated that's one of the clear potential roles of the federal government, not to define what the semantic standard is, but to demand the industry groups arrive at a conclusion by date certain or else. And reimbursement is a pretty powerful tool. CMS manages over $1 trillion budget. So the federal government has an opportunity to to overcome some of those barriers. Let me just call out one of the infamous cases in this space where a very senior technologist who had a pacemaker went to Medtronic and said, I want to see my data. And Medtronic basically said, over my dead body. And so we need two things to happen. We need to have a little bit of coercive regulation for the industry to set common standards, not for the government. The government has the incentives to cause industry to set a standard. And we need to have much more transparency in the open data initiative. I do not wear a pacemaker, but if I had one and I couldn't get access to my own data, my own pacemaker that is part of my body, I would be livid. And I think that we need more consumer activism in this space to help drive this as well.
I would just echo what John's saying in terms of generating consumer demand. I think right now a lot of consumers don't even know that they don't have access. It's a pretty powerful lever to be able to build a business case with an organization to say this is going to be a competitive advantage for you, to take a more flexible approach, more a non-proprietary approach that's going to increase the engagement you have with your customers so that they can then feel more empowered. And I think we're starting to see some uptick in the commercial sector.
And one related corollary on health records is one of the things I advocated for long ago is that the standards around meaningful use and certification of health records requires that you can package data in the format of a CDA or a CCD. That's the XML standard that I founded back in the 90s. And that's fine. But if you can't have certified that a vendor can interpolate those data into a longitudinal record, what good is it? And so, as of this moment, there are not rigorous requirements that EMR vendors standardize around how they create a longitudinal record. And again, the role of the consumer with their personal health record saying, hey, stop giving me all these different representations. I want one that works. And so the blue button.
The need to be able to create a longitudinal record should be driven by consumers because it is their record, whether or not it's in possession of the provider system or the individual.
And we've created an online tool called the Blue Button Connector, which is a directory of all the organizations that are sharing data back with their members and customers, patients. It's not fully complete yet, it's open source, we encourage a lot of participation to get organizations on there, but you guys can check it out. And it's really causing a new conversation because now I'm getting emails from people, why isn't my organization on there? And the answer is one of two reasons. One is I just haven't had the time to put it on there yet, or I don't know that it should be. But more often the case, it's because your organization is not participating in this movement, and let's demand that they do.
Let's take 3 more questions, hopefully from the other 2 panelists.
Hi, my name is Dunn, and I do meaningful use for Kaiser. And John, you mentioned meaningful use a couple times, and also data transmission standards like CDA. My question is, in a world where unstructured data is becoming more important, what does a data transmission standard look like when you're not leaving just structured fields but also unstructured data?
So one of the other common misnomers about big data is that there is such a distinction between structured and unstructured. And in a world where really big data does apply, there is no distinction. It is just data, whether it's a video, it's a text file, it's a sensor, it is sensor information, it's a log. Data really becomes data. So in a sense, when you think about putting data in a Hadoop platform, we really don't designate it as differently. Now, when it gets queried, it then sometimes falls into a certain kind of a structure, whether it's the structure of the query, or like, for example, there's a technology called HBase that does a key kind of column stored application that looks like a database, even though it isn't. And so there's the whole new way of thinking about data is differently. Manmeet made a mention about the DBAs. I mean, really, I think that's a key element because the DBA or like of the future is something that doesn't think about data the way it's been thought about in the past.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. In the past, the data was forced into a design which already existed. That was called structured data. So you define the RDBMS structure and all that. Today, the design is changing. People are putting data, as they've been hearing terms like data lake, data dump, data whatever. but then on the way out, data is still being designed. So the design is being done on the way out when the queries are pulling in, like HBase and all that, which are there in the tool. So data still is structured on that way. The standards would not change, everything would stay the same. But it's the data, how the approach, the way people are thinking, the data now design is on the way out instead of the way in. So that's the reason you can put as much data from wherever you can. There could be 100 ingress points and there could be 13 egress points. And that's what makes privacy completely different and very important for us. But that's the whole thing.
Here, there's a good example. There's a customer of ours that actually is analyzing the anomalous behavior between their network log traffic and their trading floor application. So in other words, you have a rogue trader or a trader that makes a mistake in a trade. And is there a correlation between somebody penetrating the network, in other words, somebody getting in and trying to disrupt the financial services institution, or is it just kind of uncorrelated? And so those are correlations that were never before possible because data was treated separately. And I think when you treat data as a single type of a thing, then you can actually run correlations against different types. It makes it much more interesting as Manmeet talked about, as you're pulling the data out, you're actually running the structure on it.
Thank you.
Thought I'd throw a financial services example in there just to mix it up a little bit.
And if you watch the Charlie Rose episode from last night, it's all about that in the financial services. Fascinating too.
So we heard a salient theme, I think, throughout the Dominique came and worked for Kaiser Permanente as well. We heard a theme of the importance of partnering with the client, in the case of healthcare, the patient, and the actual collection of the data to pull together data from multiple dimensions and to get really the full story. But I was curious if there's been, any of you have given a lot of thought to, or any thought to, how you actually engage the client in thinking through the potential meaningful use of the data, no pun intended, as far as what the insights that could be drawn from the data are. Clearly, I'm sure there are some communities of interest or different groups that you can apply this to, but has that been done, and are there any examples even just in
I think there's a lot of efforts right now and a lot of communities that are being generated because there's so much data, whether it's condition-specific communities, like patients like me that are sharing insights about themselves, NF1 studies that can draw a lot of insight at an individual level when you start sharing that across communities, best practices. Robert B. Johnson Foundation just launched an initiative called Flip the Clinic, which is all about getting providers to partner with their patients to think through what meaningful use in the doctor's office actually looks like. Not talking about meaningful use in the incentive program. And there's a way for people to start collaborating online and in person around some of these initiatives that I think is only going to increase in terms of the usefulness of what the outcomes. And for me, I'm really interested in starting to find best practices around shared decision making and seeing how those best practices can be scaled and be tailored to different communities and different individuals based on what's working and what's not.
So in addition to patients like me, which is, Jamie Haywood, founder, really pioneered this space. Ronnie Zeiger, who created the Google Flu mapping, which was initially quite successful because of the human curation, and they got in trouble recently in terms of predictive value because they don't do the human curation anymore. He has a startup now called Smart Patients, which is completely targeted at the question you asked. There are literally scores of startups that are operating in this space, anticipating much more accessibility of patients to their own data and assisted interpretation of those data.
One example which I can see from my experience, my product was bought by one of the healthcare companies to protect their data on PII. Like there was so much personal information, they used it. But then once the data was masked, the PII data was masked, then they go like, okay, now we have so much data, it is useless, we can shred it basically, but it has since got some value in it. So what they did was they said, okay, who's gonna buy this data? So they went to the pharmacies, and the pharmacies bought that data because with that data there was zip code, and there was age, and there was the patients like heart attack or whatever they had. So they could figure out where there will be a demand for heart attack medication or blood pressure medication, all that, they were able to get that fulfilled beforehand. Like, so many times you would have waited, a pharmacy said there is no medication for you, you have to wait 4 more days to get that medication. Now they could pre-fill that because they could use that data in a very sensible way. And they did not know that use of that data at that point when they used the product.
Thank you.
My name is Jackie Mattison, and I'm from SAP. My question is more as a consumer than a patient. So much of healing is about the human-to-human connection, and yet technology is going to replace a lot of that in the model that you described. How do you reconcile that, and what might be the social consequences to that that we're not yet seeing?
Actually, I would disagree with that. I actually think the use of technology actually increases the quality of the human connection. Matter of fact, the very most simple one is how many people have not been touched in some way socially by the use of an online mechanism like Facebook? Reconnected with old people, connected with, I have family members that live overseas that I don't see a lot. So I actually think in some cases, this is the notion of technology actually enabling things that we weren't able to do before. I can also tell you that I travel a lot, and as it relates to the way I book travel, you know, the plane, the seat on the plane, you know, the specific hotel room that I tend to like, all gets done without me even having to do anything that I would have had to do. It maybe taken 4, 5, 6 steps before, and chances are it might have gotten wrong because it would have actually required human intervention. So in some cases, I think the natural reaction of a lot of us as we start to use more technology, you think about how technology is used, is that it diminishes it. I actually don't agree with that. I actually think it greatly enhances our ability to interact with one another in a more rich way as well.
I disagree with that a little bit because today I'm virtually connected with everybody. I know half of the people who I was growing up with in school, but I don't know my neighbors. My life is very efficient. I can book my ticket, I can see my hotel room. Before I even go to the hotel, I know what shower they will have. But I still don't know who I'm traveling with. I'm not talking to him on my phone. So I think we are becoming socially incompatible with other people, and I don't know how next generation is going to treat us from that, or our kids are going to be, are they going to be more virtual animals or real animals like us? When we were growing up, the life was different, and now it's very different. So it's making life very difficult from that angle. So if the person is very social, it's creating more depression cases. Yes, more are coming to light, but I think John can add to it. Probably more people are taking depression medication since 1950 to now. More cases are coming to light, or it is less social?
So I think we have an epidemic of stress and depression, and I think a lot of it revolves around our abandoning some of the fundamental principles of blue zones that have been studied around the world, whether Costa Rica, Japan, or elsewhere, that show that how important having healthy social relationships as well as healthy exercise diets is to our overall sense of happiness. I think the country of Bhutan and their creation over 30 years ago of the gross national happiness as a substitute for gross national product is very important. And I think we need to reframe. I think the healthcare industry is broken in many, many ways. But fundamentally, I do believe technology, and I do accept that as a completely valid question and observation. Technology has gotten in the way. What I've been working towards and continue to work towards is a way where we put technology in the background and we restore the ability for the care delivery system to have a much more empathic and compassionate relationship rather than a technical and data-driven relationship. I think we need to be able to use the data to help convey what are the options in terms of the values of that individual, caring about what the values of the individual and their personal care team is, and engaging the personal care team above and beyond the professional care team. So I think we need to change how medical school entrants are accepted, and I think we need to pay much more attention to their ability to understand other people's values and perspectives and to be empathic and to use data to support empathic conversations and connections. So I am very, very optimistic that technology will lead us there, but I think today it's led us away from that state more than it's led us towards it.
And just to add a little bit is something we talk a lot about, designing products and services in the digital space for health and healthcare. How do we use technology to scale great people so that they can spend more time with people? They got into medicine so that they can spend time with people, and increasingly they're spending less time with people. So I think there's a role for technology to play to actually to scale those great people and help replace them.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I mean, I simply asked the question because I've been in the technology industry for more years than I care to admit, and it seems like, especially here in Silicon Valley, we lose sight of doing things simply because we can, or it's innovative, it's creative, it's different, and we forget that that has a consequence, and I think there will be social consequences we're already seeing, and I just think we need to find that balance.
And both the book, The Second Machine Age, and the writings of George Packer take that issue on very, very head on. And there's a new group started called Framework for Humanity out of Stanford that is taking these issues on. And there's a website called impossible.com that is going to be launched here in the US very soon, which takes compassionate action a la Airbnb or Uber to scale around what do I need and who's interested in providing this service. So there's a lot, there's an emerging zeitgeist around that question. I think it's a critical question.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. In the end, I would like to ask each panelist if, just very quickly, maybe in 5 seconds, if you can look at the crystal ball and give us a big data prediction. And we'll try to edit this portion of the recording. So,
by year 2020, 10 times more knowledge will be generated by big data analytics with research in silico than will be generated by conventional clinical control trials.
A petabyte of today would be a gigabyte in 2020. Petabyte would look like a gigabyte of what it is today.
I think cancer treatment's going to pave the way for best practices and a good model for us to apply in other areas.
Wow. I think, it would be, I think whatever prediction I would make would be surpassed by 10x. So I think our ability to conceive what the future is very small. We're at the very very beginning of, I think, what is a very interesting new way.
I vote for Kirk's prediction.
thank you again. Thank you for all the panelists, and great having you.